Have you ever found yourself wondering how your brain, in those quiet moments, somehow orchestrates the symphony of your memories and guides you, seemingly without effort, through the world around you? It's a remarkable, almost magical feat, really. And today we're taking a deep dive into one of the brain's most fundamental rhythms, a fascinating electrical pattern called the theta oscillation. But here's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about a static beat. We're exploring a truly groundbreaking discovery that these brainwaves actually travel. They move through that crucial area responsible for memory and navigation, your hippocampus. For what feels like ages, scientists have wrestled with this puzzle. We've known about these rhythmic waves, these internal brain beats in animal brains for quite some time. But their precise nature, especially this dynamic wave-like movement in humans, that's been stubbornly elusive. Are our brains performing the same complex internal dance? And if they are, what does that mean for how you remember that conversation from yesterday, how you learn a new skill, or even how you find your way to a new coffee shop? Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack some truly groundbreaking research that peered directly into the human brain to answer these questions. We'll explore the sophisticated techniques used, the surprising findings about how these waves move, and maybe most importantly, what these traveling theta waves reveal about the very fabric of your conscious experience. And to guide us through this intricate neural landscape, we have an expert who can really connect the dots and make even the densest neuroscience accessible. Okay, so let's unpack this for you. We often hear about brainwaves, right? Just generally. But what exactly is a theta oscillation specifically? Why is it so important, especially in the hippocampus?
That's a great place to start. What's fascinating here is that theta oscillations are a really key brain signal, a distinct rhythmic electrical activity, almost like an internal beat or a pulse that originates in your hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus itself, it's an absolute powerhouse. Think of it as the brain's central hub for processing and forming new memories, especially those memories tied to specific events or locations, your what, where, when memories.
Like remembering your first day at school or something like that?
Exactly, that's your episodic memory. And beyond memory, it's absolutely critical for spatial navigation, understanding where you are, how to get somewhere new. And theta isn't just background noise, it's very active. Its amplitude or strength increases significantly during behaviors where the hippocampus is really engaged, like when you're exploring a new place or trying hard to remember something.
So it ramps up when the hippocampus is working hard.
Precisely. It's like the hippocampus is revving its engine. And it also plays a vital role in modulating synaptic plasticity. That's the process of strengthening or weakening connections between neurons, which is, the very basis of how you learn.
So it's more than just a signal, it's actively involved in the actual work of memory, like a command signal for learning.
Exactly. You could almost think of it like a conductor for an orchestra. It coordinates brain-wide networks, making sure different brain parts communicate effectively, in sync. So understanding theta isn't just niche neuroscience. It's fundamental to understanding how our brains support a whole range of behaviors, from memory to navigation.
That conductor analogy really helps. Now, before these recent discoveries, how did scientists generally think about these theta rhythms? Was it always seen as this dynamic?
For a long time, the traditional view was, well, simpler. Theta rhythm was mostly thought of as a global signal, indicating when the hippocampus as a whole switched between different processing states. Imagine the entire hippocampus flipping a single switch, from, say, encoding new information to retrieval of old information, all at once. It was a very uniform, sort of all-or-nothing view.
Right, like the whole structure acting in lockstep.
Yeah.
But the research we're diving into suggests something much more dynamic, almost a physical movement. That's where it gets really mind-bending, isn't it?
Absolutely. Recent studies, particularly in rodents, unveiled a new view. Theta oscillations are actually traveling waves. This means that separate segments of the hippocampus can simultaneously be in different theta phases. Picture a ripple moving across a pond. Different parts of the surface are at different points in the wave's cycle at the same time, right? Some peaking, some in a trough. Similarly, this electrical wave travels continuously along the length of the hippocampus, specifically along its septal temporal axis. Think of the hippocampus like a long, curved structure, and this axis is just its length.
Okay, so different parts are at different phases simultaneously. Why is that so important? What does that phase difference allow the brain to do?
That's a crucial question. The phase where you are in that wave cycle is thought to be critical for something called phase coding. One theory suggests that hippocampal neurons signal future or past events by activating at late or early theta phases, respectively. So if a theta wave is traveling and different parts of the hippocampus have different phases at the same instant, it means neurons at different physical positions can simultaneously represent information about events at different times.
Wow.
It completely changes our understanding. It's not just what a cell is firing about, but where that cell is located relative to the traveling wave at that moment. It's like a dynamic timeline.
A living timeline. That's a profound shift. Now, this work started in rodents. Why was there uncertainty about whether humans also had these traveling waves? What were the hurdles?
That's a key point. Early work even suggested the human hippocampus didn't have theta, or if it did, it was vastly different. Later research showed task-related theta, but with crucial differences from rodents. Lower amplitude, shorter duration, and a broader, generally slower frequency range.
Slower. How much slower?
Well, rodent theta is typically around 8 Hz, pretty consistent. Human hippocampal theta can span anywhere from 2 to 10 Hz, a much wider range. These differences made it a really open question whether the traveling wave phenomenon, so clear in rodents, actually persisted in the human brain. This research set out to answer exactly that.
So given those differences and doubts, how do you even look for these subtle waves in the living human brain? Ethically and precisely, I mean.
It's a huge challenge. This study used a unique and ethically rigorous approach. They recorded brain activity from 14 epilepsy patients who already had multi-contact depth electrodes surgically implanted. These were implanted along the longitudinal axis of their hippocampus purely for clinical reasons, to map their seizures before potential surgery. It's a standard procedure.
Oh, okay.
The researchers, with full patient consent, leveraged this clinical necessity to conduct their study. It provided an unprecedented direct view.
So these weren't just on the scalp. These were probes inside the brain along the hippocampus itself.
Exactly. Delicate probes, each with multiple tiny recording contacts, usually spaced about 5 millimeters apart. This gave multiple measurements along the hippocampus's long axis. And the location of each contact was precisely identified using post-implant CT scans, aligned with pre-implant MRIs, using standardized coordinates like a GPS for the brain to pinpoint their exact 3D position. Precision was key.
And what were the patients doing during these recordings? Just resting?
No, they were awake and actually performing an encoding phase of a working memory task on a laptop. This allowed the researchers to see the hippocampus in action during active cognitive processing, making the findings more relevant.
Okay, so you had these incredibly precise recordings during a memory task.
Mhm.
But I imagine isolating these specific rhythms from all the other brain activity is still a huge challenge. How did they actually find the traveling waves and all that data?
That's where the sophisticated signal processing comes in. They used a really optimized 3-step procedure, designed to find groups of electrodes measuring the same oscillation while filtering out noise. First step, identifying theta clusters. They cleaned up the raw data, then used Morlet wavelets, think of them as mathematical tools, to measure power and phase at each electrode across many frequencies. The challenge is the brain's 1F background spectrum, basically, general noise. They used clever statistics, robust regression to subtract this background, revealing the distinct theta peaks, like finding a clear note above a hum. They looked for clusters of 4 or more electrodes showing these peaks at the same frequency in the human theta range, 210 Hz. This ensures it's a coherent oscillation, not just random local blips. Second step, testing for instantaneous phase synchrony. Once they had a cluster, they needed to confirm the electrodes were all dancing to the same beat consistently. They used circular statistics to measure each electrode's phase relative to the cluster's average. Imagine checking if clock hands maintained consistent offsets. A statistical test, the Rayleigh test, confirms significant phase coupling.
Making sure they're really linked.
Exactly. Then the exciting part, detecting traveling waves. With synchronized clusters confirmed, they looked for a spatial progression of phase. Did the phase systematically shift from one electrode to the next along the hippocampus? If it did, that was their traveling wave. They used a linear regression model to quantify the relationship between electrode position and phase shift.
But how do you know that shift is real? A genuine traveling wave, not just a random pattern that looks like one.
Critical point. They used a rigorous permutation procedure. They basically shuffled the electrode locations randomly, thousands of times, 10,000 times actually, and reran the analysis. If the actual pattern was significantly stronger than, say, 95% of the random shuffles, it was deemed statistically significant. A real traveling wave, not just chance.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
It has to be. Once confirmed, they could precisely calculate the wave's properties.
Yeah.
its wave number, phase change across space, its propagation speed, how fast it moves, and its wavelength.
So after all that meticulous work, the big answer, did humans have traveling theta waves?
Yes. A clear, resounding yes. The initial observations were visually striking. They saw theta peaks systematically shifting later in time as they moved along the hippocampus, posterior to anterior. When visualized using spectral analysis, this produced clear diagonal bands, the telltale signature of a traveling oscillation. It confirmed human hippocampal theta are traveling waves.
Fantastic. And the direction, was it consistent?
Very consistent. Of the 11 clusters they identified, 6 showed statistically significant traveling waves. And here's the kicker. All 6 propagated in a posterior-anterior direction.
Always the same way?
Always the same way, highly significant, not by chance. This direction is consistent with the dorsal ventral propagation seen in rodents once you account for anatomical orientation differences. And importantly, it wasn't related to their epilepsy.
Okay, so humans they travel one way, but how do they propagate? You mentioned 2 models, single oscillator, SO,
Yeah.
and coupled oscillator, CO. Can you paint a picture of those for us?
Absolutely. Understanding the mechanism is vital. Let's start with the single oscillator SO model. Imagine a single master pacemaker, maybe in the medial septum nearby, sending signals out along tracks to different points in the hippocampus. Because these tracks, the axons, have fixed conduction delays, the signal arrives at different points after fixed time delays. The key prediction here is that the wave speed would be constant, no matter the frequency of the oscillation itself, like a train running at a fixed speed.
Okay, fixed speed regardless of the rhythm.
Right. Now contrast that with the coupled oscillators, C model. Here, think of the hippocampus itself as a series of many tiny local oscillators, weakly connected like a line of dominoes. The oscillation starts at one end and propagates along because each local oscillator influences the next through weak phase coupling. The propagation is driven by these local interactions, and the crucial prediction for the CO model. The propagation speed would correlate with the temporal frequency. Faster oscillations push through faster, like dominoes falling quicker if you push the first one harder.
And this is where the unique human theta came in handy, right? The broad frequency range. Rodents couldn't help distinguish these models.
Exactly. Rodent theta is usually around 8 Hz, very narrow, hard to see a frequency-speed relationship, but human theta spans 2 to 8 Hz. This variation allowed the researchers to compare waves with different frequencies, and the finding was clear. A strong positive correlation between temporal frequency and propagation speed. Faster waves moved more rapidly.
A strong correlation. So what does that tell us? Which model fits the human data?
It strongly supports the coupled oscillators, CO model. Theta waves seem to propagate in the human hippocampus through these local, weakly interacting oscillators along its length. It's an emergent property of the network itself.
Interesting. So it's more like the hippocampus is generating this wave internally through local chats, not just receiving it from one boss.
That's a good way to put it. It suggests a more dynamic, locally driven coordination.
So if the CO model is right, what does that imply about the spread of theta phase across the hippocampus? Is it messy or ordered?
The CO model predicts a remarkably consistent spatial distribution of phase, regardless of the oscillation's frequency, meaning the relative phase differences between specific spots remain constant, even if the wave speed changes. They found a mean spatial frequency of about 7.2 degrees per centimeter, a very precise rate of phase change across space. This consistency is crucial for reliable function.
Yeah, did they map out this phase spread across the whole human hippocampus? What's the total range?
Yes, that was another key question. Previous studies had conflicting reports. They used 2 approaches. First, looking within patients, they found phase differences up to 23 degrees, correlating with distance. But to get the big picture, they pooled data across patients, normalizing phase relative to a common anatomical point. This revealed a total range of about 28 degrees across a 40-millimeter segment. Since the human hippocampus can be up to 70 millimeters long, extrapolating suggests the full range across the entire structure is roughly 28 to 49 degrees, much less than a full 360.
Okay, so not a full wave cycle spread out, but a consistent, organized, partial progression. More controlled, perhaps.
Precisely. This consistent, coordinated phase spread is a hallmark of the CO model. It allows for predictable phase relationships, which is vital for encoding information.
And they double-checked this wasn't just an artifact of electrode placement, like an electrode cutting across layers.
Excellent point, and yes, they rigorously checked. They compared the angles and 3D coordinates of electrodes that did and did not show traveling waves. No significant differences. This strongly suggests their findings weren't due to misleading layer shifts, but are true longitudinal waves along the hippocampus.
Okay, one more piece. You mentioned human theta power. Its strength varies. Does that affect these traveling waves?
It's an important characteristic. They separated data into high and low theta power periods. While frequency and speed didn't change much, something critical did. All 6 traveling waves showed significantly increased phase consistency when theta power was high.
Ah, so a stronger signal means a more reliable, more tightly coordinated wave. Makes sense for solid information processing.
Exactly. It suggests theta power reflects how reliably neighboring sites maintain their specific phase relationship. When the hippocampus needs to be on point, the amplitude increases to support that reliable coordination, like turning up the conductor's volume.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, from the waves themselves to how they're detected and how they move. Let's get to the big so what.
Hmm.
What does confirming these traveling waves, operating via coupled oscillators, really tell us about how your brain works, your memory, your navigation?
Right. The implications. Firstly, it's a crucial interspecies link. It supports using animal models to understand human memory, despite our differences. That's important for research. Secondly, and perhaps more profoundly, the CO model, with its consistent spatial phase distribution, provides a blueprint for how your hippocampal neurons encode information. Because phase differences are coordinated, a neuron can sync with others just by monitoring its local phase. This offers a straightforward mechanism for synchronizing assemblies of neurons, those groups of cells working together thought to be fundamental for memory.
So it allows for efficient communication and coordination within the hippocampus itself.
Precisely, optimizing phase-based encoding of your experiences.
Let's connect this back to that idea of phase coding for past and future events. How do traveling waves enhance that?
This is where it gets really sophisticated. Think about place cells neurons firing for specific locations. They use theta phase coding. Now imagine that theta wave traveling. As it propagates, individual neurons experience a sequence of phases. Given the link between phase and time representation, early phase equal past, late phase of future, this means individual neurons sequentially represent information about future, present, and past events as the wave passes. So a spatially distributed group of neurons along the wave could simultaneously represent relationships between events at different times, each cell firing at its specific local phase along the wave.
It sounds like a dynamic internal timeline created by the moving wave itself, constantly updating.
Exactly. A highly sophisticated way to organize and retrieve complex event sequences connecting moments in time to form coherent memories.
Now, the hippocampus talks to the rest of the brain, especially the neocortex. How do these traveling waves help organize that massive flow of information?
This is a really intriguing implication. The septal temporal axis, where the waves travel, also has functional variations. Place cells at the posterior septal end have small, precise fields encoding specific details. As you move anterior, temporal, place cells have larger, coarser fields representing broader spatial information or concepts.
So what happens when the wave travels through this gradient, from specific to general?
As the wave moves posterior to anterior, it would cause septal cells, small fields, specific info, to activate first, followed by temporal cells, large fields, general info. This suggests the hippocampus might first process specific details, then, as the wave moves, process broader context, a dynamic shift in precision. Now connect that to the neocortex. The hippocampus integrates inputs from diverse cortical areas, and crucially, the highest neuronal excitation seems to occur at the theta trough, the lowest point of the wave.
So as the wave travels, this trough of excitation, this peak sensitivity window, moves along the hippocampus.
Precisely. This means different parts of the hippocampus become sequentially most receptive to particular neocortical inputs at specific times. The traveling theta wave, therefore, could act like a neural searchlight. It allows the hippocampus to sequentially scan, consider, and organize different inputs from across the neocortex rather than being overwhelmed.
That's a powerful image. A moving spotlight, scanning and integrating information, bringing order to the flood of data entering the hippocampus.
It offers a compelling explanation for how the hippocampus orchestrates complex functions, from detailed memory formation to navigation, by dynamically coordinating its own activity with the rest of the brain.
What an incredible journey inside the brain. Let's just quickly recap the core insights for everyone listening. What are the key takeaways?
Okay, we've confirmed human hippocampal theta oscillations are traveling waves, moving consistently posterior to anterior. Crucially, their broad frequency range show they propagate via a coupled oscillators model. This creates a remarkably consistent and coordinated phase spread, which seems fundamental for function.
And these findings aren't just technical details. They really change how we think about your brain forming memories and navigating your world.
Exactly. These ways provide a dynamic mechanism for precise phase coding, letting the brain sequentially represent events in time and integrate information based on where a neuron is within the wave, and potentially acting as that neural searchlight coordinating with the neocortex.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's a final thought? A lingering question this research sparks that you want our listeners to ponder.
Well, it makes you wonder if our hippocampus is constantly doing this dynamic scan, using traveling waves to process specific, then broader information, integrating inputs. What does this imply for our conscious experience? Could the feeling of a memory being vivid or our ability to smoothly shift mental focus be directly tied to how robustly these waves are traveling? And, looking forward, how can we better understand this complex dance between these waves and the rest of the brain to unlock secrets of consciousness itself? It makes you wonder how much of our inner world is shaped by these invisible traveling rhythms.
A truly mind-bending thought to leave us with. Thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive into the brain's own wave surfers.